The Shroud of Turin, a linen cloth bearing the faint image of a crucified man, has fascinated the world for centuries. Is it the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ or a masterful medieval forgery? This artifact stands at the crossroads of faith, science, and history, sparking debate and investigation. For some, it's a powerful testament to the passion of Jesus. For others, it's a scientific puzzle, demanding rigorous analysis. The shroud's mystery deepens with every study, challenging us to look beyond assumptions. What can science and faith together reveal about this enduring enigma? To understand the shroud, we must clear away centuries of myth and misinformation. Sensational claims and exaggerations have clouded the real evidence. Our goal is to separate fact from fiction, focusing on what history and science can actually demonstrate. We'll examine the shroud as investigators, analyzing historical records, archaeological findings, and scientific studies. By stripping away the noise, we can see a clearer, more compelling picture emerge. Only then can we approach the shroud's mystery with honesty and depth. Our investigation spans millennia, beginning with ancient prophecies and moving through history to modern science. We'll test the details of Old Testament predictions against the evidence on the shroud. Exploring Roman crucifixion and Jewish burial customs, we'll set the historical context. Scientific analysis, bloodstains, image properties, and material studies adds another layer. This journey isn't about a single answer, but about how prophecy, history, and science converge. Can these streams of knowledge tell a coherent story about the shroud? The investigation begins in the Hebrew Scriptures, where detailed prophecies outline the Messiah's suffering and death. These ancient texts provide a checklist of events and characteristics, forming a prophetic blueprint. The convergence of multiple specific prophecies on a single figure suggests a story written in advance. Our task: does the shroud's image align with this ancient script? We're not just examining a relic, we're testing whether it matches a centuries-old prophecy. Understanding the prophetic script is our essential first step. Isaiah 53, written centuries before Jesus, describes a suffering servant pierced for others' transgressions. The prophecy details rejection, piercing, silence before accusers, death with criminals, and burial in a rich man's tomb. These specifics align strikingly with the gospel accounts of Jesus' passion. If the shroud is connected to Jesus, its mark should echo Isaiah's ancient words. This prophecy provides a series of verifiable checkpoints for our investigation. The shroud's image must be measured against this prophetic portrait. Psalm 22, written a millennium before Christ, reads like a first-hand account of crucifixion. It describes physical agony, piercing of hands and feet, and soldiers casting lots for garments, details echoed in the Gospels. These ancient words predate Roman crucifixion, yet match its horrors with chilling accuracy. The shroud's wounds and bloodstains must be compared to this prophetic narrative. Psalm 22 adds a critical layer to our blueprint, blending poetry with forensic detail. Does the shroud's evidence reflect this ancient agony? The prophecies do not end with the Messiah's final breath. They extend to the moments immediately following his death, providing crucial details about his burial. As we noted from Isaiah 53, the Messiah was to be assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. This paradoxical prophecy is a key element that sets the Messiah's burial apart from a typical crucifixion. Ordinarily, the bodies of crucified criminals were treated with contempt. They were either left on the cross to be devoured by scavenging animals or thrown into a common unmarked grave, fulfilling the grave with the wicked portion of the prophecy. However, the second part of the prophecy, with the rich in his death, points to a dramatic and unexpected intervention. A standard burial was not foreseen. Instead, a wealthy individual would step in to provide a dignified resting place. This is precisely the scenario the Gospels describe. Joseph of Arimathea, identified as a rich man and a secret disciple of Jesus, boldly went to Pontius Pilate and requested the body. He then laid Jesus in his own new tomb, a tomb carved out of rock, a luxury only the wealthy could afford. This action fulfilled Isaiah's prophecy with stunning precision, bridging the gap between a criminal's death and an honorable burial. Another prophet, Zechariah, writing around 520 years before Christ, added another layer to this picture. He prophesied, "And they will look on me, the one they have pierced." This prophecy implies that the pierced body of the Messiah would be an object of future recognition and mourning. It suggests that the body would not be unceremoniously discarded or left to decay beyond recognition. For the people to one day look on the one they pierced, the body had to be handled in a way that preserved it, at least temporarily. A hasty but careful wrapping in a burial shroud, as described in the Gospels, would be consistent with this prophetic expectation. These specific details about the burial are critically important to our study of the shroud. The cloth itself, a single, large, and expensive piece of fine linen, is not something that would have been used for a common criminal. Its very existence points to a burial of honor, one provided by a person of means, just as Isaiah prophesied. The fact that the body was wrapped at all rather than being discarded aligns with the prophetic need for the pierced body to be preserved for future recognition. The prophetic foundations, therefore, not only predict the suffering but also establish the precise conditions for the creation of an artifact like the Shroud of Turin. To understand the story told by the shroud, we must move from the words of the prophets to the harsh realities of the first-century world. We must ground our investigation in the historical context of Roman-occupied Judea. Crucifixion was not merely a method of execution. It was a calculated instrument of state terror, a public spectacle designed by Rome to crush dissent and display its absolute power. The Roman statesman Cicero called it a most cruel and disgusting punishment, reserved for slaves, rebels, and the lowest class of criminals. It was deliberately slow, agonizing, and public, serving as a visceral warning to any who might dare to challenge Roman authority. This was the world into which Jesus of Nazareth was condemned. The process of crucifixion was engineered for maximum pain and humiliation. It was a slow death by asphyxiation, dehydration, and shock, often lasting for days. The goal was not a quick end, but a prolonged public agony. Victims were forced to carry their own crossbeam, the patibulum, through the streets to the place of execution, a final journey of shame. Along the way, they would be jeered and tormented, their suffering a form of public entertainment and a grim lesson for onlookers. This historical reality provides a stark backdrop for the gospel accounts and for the silent image on the shroud. It was a death designed to strip away all dignity. The historical record from sources like the Jewish historian Josephus and Roman writers such as Tacitus confirms that crucifixion was a common practice in Judea during this period. Josephus describes thousands of Jews being crucified by the Romans during various uprisings. It was a familiar and horrifying sight. This historical certainty is crucial. We are not dealing with a mythical or symbolic event. The crucifixion of Jesus, as described in the Gospels, fits perfectly within the known political and military practices of the time. The shroud, if authentic, is not an artifact of some abstract theological concept, but a relic from a brutal and well-documented historical practice. Therefore, when we examine the shroud, we are not looking for generic marks of suffering. We are looking for specific evidence that corresponds to the known methods of Roman crucifixion in the first century. Do the wounds on the cloth align with what historians and archaeologists have told us about this gruesome practice? Does the trauma reflected in the faint image match the physical ordeal that a real historical victim would have endured? This shift from prophecy to history is a critical step in our investigation. It allows us to test the biblical narrative and the shroud's evidence against the cold, hard facts of the Roman world. The ordeal of a Roman crucifixion did not begin at the cross itself. It started with a brutal scourging, a practice known as verberatio. The victim was stripped, tied to a post, and beaten with a fearsome whip called a flagrum. This was no ordinary whip. It consisted of multiple leather thongs embedded with sharp pieces of bone, lead, or metal. Each lash was designed to tear not just the skin, but the underlying muscle tissue, exposing bone and causing massive blood loss and trauma. This scourging was so severe that many victims did not even survive to make it to the cross. It was a horrific preliminary act intended to weaken the condemned and intensify their suffering. The image on the Shroud of Turin displays evidence of precisely this kind of flogging. Forensic analysis of the cloth reveals more than 100 distinct whip marks covering the back, chest, and legs of the man in the image. The wounds are dumbbell-shaped, consistent with the double-headed metal pieces of a Roman flagrum. The angle and distribution of these marks suggest the victim was beaten by 2 soldiers, one on each side, a common Roman practice. These are not random marks. They form a clear and specific pattern of injury that aligns perfectly with the historical descriptions of a Roman scourging, a detail explicitly mentioned in the Gospel accounts of Jesus' passion. In addition to the scourging, the Gospels describe a unique act of mockery inflicted upon Jesus, the crown of thorns. The Roman soldiers twisted together a wreath of thorny branches and pressed it onto his head, mocking him as the King of the Jews. This was not a standard part of a crucifixion. It was a specific act of torment directed at this particular victim. The image on the shroud reflects this unique injury. Across the scalp and forehead, there are numerous small puncture wounds, each associated with rivulets of blood that have trickled down the face. Medical experts have noted that these blood flows accurately follow the contours of the face and are consistent with wounds from sharp thorns piercing the highly vascular scalp. This combination of injuries, a full-body scourging and a crown of thorns, is highly specific. While many thousands were crucified, it is the unique combination of these tortures that marks the passion of Jesus, as described in the Gospels. The Shroud of Turin does not just show the image of a crucified man. It shows the image of a man who was brutally scourged and crowned with thorns. This convergence of multiple specific forms of trauma is a powerful piece of circumstantial evidence. It suggests a direct link between the physical data on the cloth and the unique narrative found in the New Testament. The most iconic image of crucifixion involves nails driven through the palms of the hands. However, both historical and medical evidence suggests this is incorrect. The anatomical structure of the palm cannot support the weight of a human body. The nails would simply tear through the flesh between the metacarpal bones. Roman executioners who were experts in their grim trade knew this. To secure the victim effectively, they would drive the nail through the wrist in an area known as destot space. This location, where the carpal bones interlock, provides a strong anchor point for the nail and would sever the median nerve, causing excruciating pain and causing the thumb to contract sharply into the palm. The Shroud of Turin reflects this precise, historically accurate detail. The image on the cloth shows the nail wound not in the palm, but in the wrist. We see a large, distinct blood stain emerging from this area. Furthermore, on the image of the hands, only 4 fingers are visible on each hand. The thumbs appear to be retracted and hidden behind the palms. This is a subtle but medically precise detail, an anatomical reflex consistent with a nail piercing the median nerve at the wrist. A medieval forger, working from centuries of artistic tradition showing nails in the palms, would be highly unlikely to know, let alone depict, this specific forensic detail. Its presence on the shroud is a powerful indicator of authenticity. Archaeology has provided stunning confirmation of Roman crucifixion methods. In 1968, an ossuary, or bone box, was discovered in a tomb near Jerusalem. It contained the skeletal remains of a first-century man named Yehohanan ben Hagkol. Most remarkably, his right heel bone was still pierced by a large iron nail, which was bent at the tip, likely from hitting a knot in the wood of the cross. A small wooden plaque was found between the nail head and the bone, acting as a washer to prevent the victim from pulling his foot free. This discovery provided the first direct physical evidence of Roman crucifixion in Judea, confirming the use of large iron nails to affix the feet. The image on the shroud is consistent with this archaeological find. It shows a large, squarish wound in the area of the feet, with significant blood flow. The position suggests that one foot may have been placed over the other and pierced with a single long nail. While the exact cause of death in crucifixion was a combination of factors, the primary mechanism was eventual asphyxiation. To breathe, the victim had to push up on the nailed feet and pull up with the nailed wrists, an agonizing process that would become impossible as exhaustion set in. The body would slump, the lungs would be unable to expand, and death would slowly follow. The slumped posture of the man on the shroud tells this final terrible story. Just as understanding Roman execution methods is vital, so too is understanding first-century Jewish burial customs. These practices were deeply rooted in religious law and tradition, and they provide another critical context for evaluating the shroud. Jewish law, or halakha, mandated that a body be buried as quickly as possible, preferably on the same day of death, before sundown. This was considered a matter of profound respect for the deceased, as it was believed the soul could not be at rest until the body was interred. This urgency is a key feature in the Gospel accounts of Jesus' burial, which describe a race against time as the Sabbath was about to begin at sunset. A crucial and often overlooked detail of this law concerned the bodies of those who died a violent death, especially those executed. According to ancient Jewish law, as recorded in the Mishnah and other rabbinic texts, the body of a person executed by the state was not to be washed. The reasoning was that the blood itself was considered part of the person and essential for atonement. Therefore, the body was to be wrapped in its burial shroud, blood, dirt, and all. This is a stark contrast to a normal Jewish burial, which would involve a careful ritual washing of the body. This specific legal exception is a fingerprint of authenticity that we can look for. This legal requirement has profound implications for the Shroud of Turin. The Gospels state that Jesus was taken down from the cross and wrapped quickly in a linen cloth before being placed in the tomb. They make no mention of the body being washed, an omission that aligns perfectly with the Jewish law for a victim of execution. If the shroud is authentic, it should therefore bear the imprint of an unwashed body. Scientists studying the cloth have confirmed that the blood stains on the shroud are direct contact prints, meaning the blood was still wet or semi-coagulated when the body was wrapped. There is no evidence of the smearing that would have occurred if the body had been washed. Furthermore, immunologists have identified high levels of bilirubin in the bloodstains on the shroud. High bilirubin is a known medical consequence of severe physical trauma and shock, such as that experienced during scourging and crucifixion. This elevated bilirubin would also explain the presence of serum halos that appear around the bloodstains under UV light, indicating the blood clotted and separated on the cloth itself. These intricate forensic details, the evidence of an unwashed body, the presence of trauma-induced bilirubin, the direct contact blood prints, all point to a hasty burial of a violently killed man, perfectly matching the specific intersection of Roman brutality and Jewish burial law in first-century Jerusalem. When we turn from history to forensic science, the evidence on the Shroud of Turin becomes even more specific and compelling. The most visually arresting features on the cloth, apart from the faint body image, are the dark, reddish-brown stains that mark the locations of the wounds. For centuries, critics suggested these were simply red ochre paint, skillfully applied by a medieval artist. However, rigorous scientific testing has revealed a much more complex and profound reality. In 1978, the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, a team of credentialed scientists, conducted an intensive hands-on examination of the cloth. Their conclusion was definitive. The stains are not paint. They are composed of real human blood. Subsequent biochemical tests have confirmed these findings, identifying key components of blood like hemoglobin and albumin. But the discoveries did not stop there. Under ultraviolet light, the bloodstains exhibit a distinct characteristic faint serum halos. When a wound bleeds, the blood cells and the liquid part of the blood, called serum, begin to separate. If a bloody body is wrapped in cloth, this separation process continues, with the lighter serum wicking further into the fibers than the heavier red blood cells. This creates a faint halo around the primary bloodstain. This is precisely what is observed on the shroud, a subtle detail that would be unknown and virtually impossible for a medieval forger to replicate. The blood tells an even more detailed story of trauma. Analysis of the bloodstains has revealed unusually high concentrations of bilirubin, a substance produced by the liver when red blood cells break down under extreme stress. A person who has undergone a severe physical beating and a prolonged, agonizing death, like a Roman scourging and crucifixion, would have massively elevated levels of bilirubin in their blood. This high bilirubin content not only confirms the immense trauma suffered by the man on the shroud, but also explains the remarkably well-preserved reddish color of the stains. Blood normally turns black over time, but blood with high bilirubin content remains a reddish brown, just as we see on the cloth today. This forensic evidence points to a very specific set of circumstances. We are not just looking at blood, but at the blood of a man who was severely traumatized before death. We are looking at blood that was transferred to the cloth via direct contact with an unwashed body, allowing serum to separate naturally. These are not the characteristics of paint applied with a brush. They are the chemical and biological fingerprints of a real human crucifixion, matching the brutal historical reality of the event. The bloodstains are not just stains, they are silent witnesses to an agonizing death, preserved with astonishing forensic detail. Our investigation into the forensic evidence is not limited to the Shroud of Turin alone. There is another lesser-known relic that provides a powerful point of comparison, the Sudarium of Oviedo. The Sudarium is a small blood-stained linen cloth measuring about 84 by 53 centimeters that has been housed in the Cathedral of Oviedo, Spain, since the 8th century. Church tradition holds that this is the face cloth, or Sudarium, mentioned in the Gospel of John chapter 20 verses 6 and 7. It was believed to have been placed over the head of Jesus immediately after his death on the cross to cover his face out of respect before the body was taken down and wrapped in the larger burial shroud. Unlike the Shroud of Turin, the Sudarium of Oviedo does not contain an image. It is covered in a series of blood and fluid stains arranged in a specific pattern. For decades, a multidisciplinary team of Spanish scientists has studied these stains, reconstructing the sequence of events they represent. Their findings are remarkable. The stains are composed of 1 part blood and 6 parts pulmonary edema fluid, a watery liquid that fills the lungs during death by asphyxiation, a common cause of death in crucifixion. The fluid would have exited through the nose and mouth when the body was moved. The pattern of stains suggests the cloth was placed on the face of a dead man, with his head tilted forward and to the right. The most stunning discovery came when scientists compared the stains on the Sudarium to the facial image on the Shroud of Turin. The bloodstain patterns on both cloths match perfectly. The length of the nose, the markings on the forehead, the blood rivulets in the hair and beard. They form a perfect geometric correspondence, like 2 different puzzle pieces that fit together to form a single picture. It is as if the Sudarium recorded the initial blood flows from the face, and the shroud later recorded the final, clotted blood prints from the same face. The consistency between these 2 independent relics, separated by hundreds of miles and centuries of history, is extraordinary. But the connection goes even deeper. Independent blood analysis performed on both the shroud and the Sudarium revealed the same rare blood type, AB. While relatively uncommon in the general world population, blood type AB is more prevalent in the Middle East, particularly among Jewish populations. The fact that 2 separate cloths, both historically linked to the burial of Jesus, would not only have matching stain patterns but also share the same rare blood type, provides powerful corroborating evidence. The Sudarium acts as a forensic bookend to the shroud, telling the story of the moments immediately after death, just before the body was wrapped for burial. Perhaps the most scientifically perplexing quality of the Shroud of Turin is the nature of the image itself. It's not a painting, a photograph, or even a scorch. It's something else entirely, something that has really baffled scientists for decades. Back in the 1970s, 2 physicists from the United States Air Force Academy, John Jackson and Eric Jumper, were analyzing a photograph of the shroud using a state-of-the-art piece of NASA technology called the VP-8 image analyzer. Now, this device was designed to translate varying shades of light on a photograph into a 3-dimensional topographic map, creating a 3-dimensional relief image based on the brightness of different points. It was mainly used to analyze images of planetary surfaces like the Moon and Mars. When they fed a normal photograph of a person's face into the VP-8, the result was just a distorted, nonsensical mess. That's because a regular photo contains only light and shadow information, not distance information. But when they placed a photograph of the shroud's face into the analyzer, something incredible happened. A perfect, geometrically accurate, three-dimensional relief of a human face emerged on the screen. The image on the shroud, they discovered, was encoded with spatial depth information. The darker parts of the image, like the tip of the nose and the forehead, corresponded to points where the cloth was closest to the body, while fainter areas represented parts that were further away. This three-dimensional encoding is a unique property that no other image in the world has ever been shown to possess. No known artistic technique, ancient or modern, can create an image that contains this kind of distance-correlated information. A painter works with pigments and brushes to create the illusion of depth through light and shadow, but they can't embed actual topographical data onto a canvas. A scorch from a hot object would be darkest at the points of direct contact and fade unevenly, which is not what we see on the shroud. The image on the cloth is a perfect distance map of the body it once covered. This discovery effectively ruled out the possibility that the shroud is the work of a human artist. No medieval forger, no matter how brilliant, could have conceived of, let alone created an image with these properties centuries before the invention of three-dimensional imaging technology. The image formation process remains a profound mystery, but its characteristics are clear. It was formed by some process that acted uniformly over a distance, creating a correlation between the intensity of the image and the cloth-to-body distance. This unique three-dimensional property points to an event far beyond the capabilities of any known human technology or artistry. The theory that the shroud is a medieval painting was one of the earliest and most persistent challenges to its authenticity. It seems like a logical explanation for such a detailed and lifelike image. However, when the STURP team conducted its exhaustive analysis in 1978, one of its primary goals was to search for any trace of paint, pigment, dye, or binding media. Using a battery of tests including X-ray fluorescence, infrared spectroscopy, and direct microchemical analysis on fibers taken from the cloth, the scientists came to a startling and unanimous conclusion. There are no artistic substances on the shroud that account for the image. The image is unbelievably superficial. It resides only on the topmost fibrils of the linen threads, with a penetration depth of less than 200 nanometers, thinner than the membrane of a single cell. There is no capillarity, meaning no liquid was used to create the image, as a liquid like paint or dye would have soaked into the fibers and seeped between the threads. Instead, the image appears to be the result of a chemical change, a dehydration and oxidation of the cellulose fibers themselves, as if they were rapidly aged or discolored by a subtle energy source. There are no brushstrokes, no directionality, and no outline. The image is simply there, a ghostly discoloration of the cloth itself. While microscopic particles of red ochre were found on the shroud, they were scattered randomly and not associated with the image areas. In fact, many were found in the blood-stained regions, but the blood itself tested negative for iron oxide. The STURP scientists concluded that these particles were likely contaminants that accumulated over centuries of the shroud, being pressed against painted copies and icons. The particles of red ochre could not, under any circumstance, be responsible for the detailed, high-resolution body image. The chemistry simply does not work. The image and the blood are two separate and distinct features on the cloth. This absence of any artistic medium is one of the most powerful scientific arguments against the forgery hypothesis. A human artist must use some kind of substance to create an image. They must apply it with a tool, leaving behind telltale traces. The Shroud of Turin has no such traces. It defies every known artistic method. The question is no longer, how did an artist make this? The question has become, what natural or supernatural process could create a high-resolution, three-dimensional, and chemically unique image on linen without leaving a single trace of the mechanism behind? The silence of the cloth on this point is one of its most profound statements. Beyond the image and the blood, the very fabric of the shroud tells its own story. The cloth itself is a large, high-quality linen sheet, measuring approximately 14 feet 3 inches long by 3 feet 7 inches wide. The linen is woven in a 3-to-1 herringbone twill, a complex and expensive weave for its time. While some have claimed this type of weave was not available in the 1st century, archaeological discoveries have proven otherwise. Similar herringbone textiles have been found in other 1st century contexts in the Middle East, including at the fortress of Masada. The material itself is consistent with a high-status burial cloth from that specific time and place. Further analysis of the cloth has revealed the presence of microscopic pollen grains and dust particles that act as a kind of environmental fingerprint, tracing the shroud's journey through history. Dr. Max Frey, a Swiss criminologist, identified pollen from numerous plant species that are unique to the regions of Jerusalem and the ancient Byzantine Empire, which is modern-day Turkey. He also found pollen from plants that grow in France and Italy, mapping a geographical path that aligns perfectly with the known historical record of the shroud's movements. While Frey's work has faced some criticism, subsequent studies have confirmed the presence of Middle Eastern plant DNA on the cloth. Another intriguing clue is found in the dirt on the shroud, particularly around the areas of the nose, knees, and feet. Analysis of this dirt revealed particles of travertine aragonite limestone with a specific crystalline structure and trace element composition. This exact type of limestone is not found all over the world. However, it is a perfect match for the specific travertine aragonite found in the ancient tombs and caves around the city of Jerusalem. This suggests that the man wrapped in the cloth had fallen, bloodying his knees and face, and that the cloth picked up dust and dirt, unique to the geological environment of Jerusalem's burial caves. When we put all these forensic and archaeological clues together, a remarkably consistent picture emerges. We have a linen cloth of a type used in the 1st century Middle East. Its fibers contain pollen and DNA from plants native to Jerusalem. It bears the image of a man who was crucified according to Roman practice and buried according to Jewish law. The dirt on the cloth matches the geology of Jerusalem's tombs. The blood is type AB, consistent with Middle Eastern populations. The image contains 3-dimensional information impossible for a forger to create. Each piece of evidence on its own is intriguing. Together, they form a powerful, cumulative case that demands our serious consideration. Our journey has taken us through 2 seemingly separate worlds, the ancient realm of Old Testament prophecy and the modern, meticulous world of forensic science. On one hand, we have the words of prophets like Isaiah and David, who, centuries before the event, painted a detailed portrait of a suffering Messiah. On the other hand, we have the cold, hard data from scientists studying a piece of linen, blood types, pollen grains, serum halos, and 3-dimensional images. The truly breathtaking moment in this investigation occurs when we lay these 2 worlds side by side. It is here that we witness a stunning convergence, where the ancient script of prophecy finds its physical echo in the forensic evidence on the cloth. This convergence is not about finding 1 or 2 loose connections. It is about a systematic, point-by-point alignment between what was foretold and what has been found. The prophecies did not just predict a generic death. They offered specific, unusual details about the Messiah's suffering and burial. Likewise, the shroud does not bear the marks of just any crucifixion. It displays a unique combination of wounds and circumstances. When the specificity of the prophecy matches the specificity of the forensic evidence, we are compelled to move beyond coincidence. We are witnessing a unified story told across millennia, through 2 different languages, the language of divine revelation and the language of physical science. Consider the weight of this alignment. The prophets provided a blueprint, a set of predictions that could be tested. They foretold piercing, scourging, a death among criminals, and a burial with the rich. Science, centuries later and without any theological agenda, examined an artifact and found evidence of a man who was pierced in his wrists and feet, brutally scourged with a Roman flagrum, and wrapped in an expensive linen cloth inconsistent with a common criminal's burial. The scientific findings do not just support the gospel narrative. They independently verify the conditions described in prophecies written long before the gospels existed. Science becomes an unwitting commentator on the fulfillment of ancient scripture. This powerful synergy transforms our understanding of the shroud. It ceases to be merely a fascinating historical object or a controversial religious relic. Instead, it becomes a potential bridge between promise and fulfillment, a tangible link that connects the Old Testament's prophetic expectation with the New Testament's historical claim. The image on the linen is not just a record of suffering, it is a potential confirmation that the suffering it records was the very suffering that the prophets declared would belong to the Messiah. This convergence challenges us to see the bigger picture, to recognize a single coherent narrative woven through prophecy, history, and science itself. The Old Testament prophets repeatedly used a very specific and violent word to describe the Messiah's suffering: pierced. Isaiah 53 proclaimed, "He was pierced for our transgressions." Zechariah 12 foretold a day when the people would look on me, the one they have pierced. And in Psalm 22, David wrote with chilling foresight, "They pierced my hands and my feet." This specific action, piercing, was prophesied a millennium before crucifixion became a standardized Roman practice. It stands as a stark and testable prediction. The Messiah would not be stoned, the common Jewish method of execution, nor would he die of disease. His death would be characterized by the act of being pierced. Now let us turn to the forensic evidence on the Shroud of Turin. The cloth tells the exact same story, but in the silent language of blood and trauma. The image reveals clear, distinct wounds in the wrists and feet, locations of profuse bleeding consistent with large nails being driven through flesh and bone. The wound in the side, a gaping lesion between the ribs, tells of a final post-mortem piercing by a Roman lance. This wound produced a flow of blood and a watery fluid, scientifically identified as pericardial or pleural fluid, perfectly matching the gospel account of blood and water flowing from Jesus' side, and medically consistent with a spear thrust into the chest of a crucified victim. The precision of the match is astounding. The prophecies did not just say the Messiah would be wounded, they said he would be pierced. The shroud does not just show a wounded man, it shows a man pierced in the very manner of a first-century crucifixion. Furthermore, the details on the shroud provide a level of forensic accuracy that a medieval artist working from tradition would almost certainly get wrong. The placement of the nail wound in the wrist, not the palm, is a key example. This anatomical correctness, which aligns with both Roman practice and modern medical understanding, gives profound credibility to the image as a genuine record of a crucifixion event. Thus, the tale of the pierced Messiah is told twice. It is first told through the inspired words of the prophets who saw the event from a distance of centuries. It is then told again through the physical evidence on a linen cloth, which recorded the event with forensic precision. The two accounts do not contradict. They reinforce one another in the most powerful way. The shroud becomes a physical testament to the fulfillment of the prophetic word, a silent witness that the unique death foretold by Isaiah, Zechariah, and David was carried out in history, leaving behind an indelible physical trace for future generations to examine. The prophecies surrounding the Messiah's death did not end with his last breath. They extended to the unique circumstances of his burial. Isaiah 53, verse 9, presented a stunning paradox. The Messiah would be assigned a grave with the wicked, yet with the rich in his death. This prophecy implies a death as a criminal, followed by an unexpectedly honorable burial provided by a person of wealth. This detail is crucial because it sets the Messiah's burial apart from the fate of nearly all other crucifixion victims, whose bodies were typically discarded in common graves or left for scavengers. The prophecy therefore predicts a very specific and unusual burial protocol. The Shroud of Turin itself stands as a powerful piece of physical evidence that confirms this exact scenario. The very existence of such a large, high-quality linen cloth points to a burial of means. A standard, impoverished criminal would not have been wrapped in a 14-foot sheet of fine herringbone linen. This was an expensive item, the kind of burial shroud that a wealthy individual, like the Joseph of Arimathea described in the Gospels, would purchase. The cloth itself, therefore, testifies to the second half of Isaiah's prophecy, with the rich in his death. It is a silent witness to an honorable burial that interrupted the expected desecration of a criminal's body. Moreover, the forensic evidence on the shroud aligns with the legal and practical necessities of a hasty burial before the Sabbath, a detail central to the gospel accounts. The presence of direct contact bloodstains from an unwashed body is perfectly consistent with Jewish law for a victim of execution. The dirt on the cloth, matching the unique limestone of Jerusalem's tombs, grounds the event in a specific geographical location. The pollen evidence, pointing to flora from the Judean region, further cements this connection. These details, revealed by science, paint a picture that perfectly matches the hurried yet honorable burial described in the New Testament, a burial that fulfilled Isaiah's ancient prophecy. In this, we see a beautiful harmony between the prophetic word and the physical artifact. The prophecy required a burial that was both dishonorable in its cause, a criminal's execution, and honorable in its execution, a rich man's tomb and cloth. The Shroud of Turin is the physical manifestation of this paradox. It bears the marks of a brutal criminal's death, yet its very nature as a fine linen cloth speaks to the honor and wealth involved in the burial. It is as if the cloth itself is the fulfillment of the prophecy, a tangible piece of evidence that the strange and specific burial foretold for the Messiah did, in fact, take place. When we step back and view the evidence in its totality, we see that the Old Testament roots and the forensic findings on the shroud are not just parallel lines of inquiry. They are threads that weave together to form a single, coherent, and deeply resonant narrative. This is the story of a suffering king, a figure whose identity was established in prophecy centuries before his arrival, and whose passion was recorded with stunning detail on his burial cloth. The prophecies of Isaiah, the Psalms, and Zechariah provided the script, outlining a unique combination of suffering, piercing, and burial that would identify the Messiah. The Shroud of Turin, when subjected to scientific scrutiny, presents us with a physical artifact that appears to have followed this script to the letter. The scourging marks, the crown of thorns, the nail wounds in the wrists, the pierced side, the expensive linen, and the unwashed body. Each detail on the cloth corresponds to a specific element of the prophetic and historical record. It is the cumulative weight of this evidence that is so compelling. This is not a matter of a single ambiguous connection, but a multi-layered correspondence across numerous independent data points. The shroud doesn't just match one prophecy, it matches the entire prophetic narrative of the Passion. This unifying narrative challenges the notion that faith and science must be in conflict. In the case of the shroud, science acts as an illuminator, revealing details that enrich our understanding of the historical and prophetic texts. The discovery of high bilirubin levels in the blood, for example, gives us a deeper appreciation for the physical trauma described in Psalm 22. The 3D imaging that reveals the cloth did not touch a flat corpse, but rather a real human form, gives new life to the gospel accounts of the burial. Science, in this context, does not diminish faith, but provides a foundation for a more informed and robust belief. Ultimately, the connection between the Old Testament roots and the shroud's evidence points to a story of incredible scope and intention. It suggests a plan set in motion long ago, a promise made and then fulfilled in the crucible of history. The shroud, if authentic, serves as the final, silent chapter of this Old Testament story, a physical postscript to the prophecies. It stands as a potential witness that the suffering servant described by Isaiah was not a myth, and that the pierced king of Psalm 22 was not a metaphor. He was a real person who lived, suffered, and died, leaving behind a possible trace of his story for all the world to see. We began this journey by acknowledging the Shroud of Turin as an enduring enigma, a mystery that sits at the crossroads of faith, history, and science. Throughout our investigation, we've, carefully stripped away the layers of myth and sensationalism to focus on the verifiable evidence. We've traced the prophetic blueprint laid out in the Old Testament, explored the brutal historical context of Roman crucifixion and Jewish burial law, and delved into the startling findings of modern forensic science. The result is, a shift in perspective. The shroud moves from being a mere object of curiosity or blind devotion to becoming a foundation for a more profound, informed faith that isn't afraid to ask hard questions. This journey from mystery to informed faith is crucial in our modern age. Many people today feel that faith requires a suspension of intellect, a leap into the dark without any supporting evidence. The Shroud of Turin challenges this assumption directly. It suggests that belief doesn't have to be blind. Instead, it can be built upon a convergence of evidence from multiple independent fields of study. When ancient prophecy, documented history, archaeological discoveries, and forensic data all point in the same direction, It provides a powerful intellectual permission structure for belief. It allows both the heart and the mind to engage with the claims of the gospel in a holistic way. An informed faith is not a faith without questions. Rather, it's a faith that has the courage to live with the questions while still recognizing the overwhelming weight of the evidence that is available. The Shroud does not answer every question about its origin or the resurrection itself. No single artifact could. However, it provides a substantial body of data that is remarkably consistent with the biblical account of Jesus' death and burial. This allows a believer to stand on solid ground, knowing their faith is not based on wishful thinking but is supported by a surprising and compelling array of factual, testable information that has withstood decades of intense scrutiny. Ultimately, the clarification of these details matters because it grounds the abstract concepts of theology in tangible reality. The suffering of Christ is no longer just a doctrine to be recited. It's visualized in the brutal scourge marks and the piercing wounds. The love of God is no longer just a theory. It's seen in the honorable burial provided for a man who died a criminal's death, just as the prophets foretold. The Shroud invites us to move beyond a simplistic, inherited faith and to build a personal conviction rooted in a deep and thoughtful examination of the evidence God has allowed to survive through the centuries. One of the most critical principles in any serious investigation is the concept of cumulative evidence. A single piece of circumstantial evidence can often be explained away. A lone fingerprint or a solitary witness statement might be dismissed as a coincidence or a mistake. However, when dozens of independent pieces of evidence, all from different sources, begin to point to the same conclusion, the case becomes exponentially stronger. This is precisely the situation we encounter with the Shroud of Turin. Its power does not lie in a single smoking gun proof, but in the overwhelming weight of many converging lines of evidence that tell one coherent story. Let us briefly recap the evidence we've examined. We have ancient prophecies from Isaiah, the Psalms, and Zechariah that specifically foretell piercing, scourging, and a unique burial for the Messiah. We have the historical record of Roman crucifixion and first-century Jewish burial customs, which align perfectly with the gospel accounts. We have the forensic data from the Shroud itself, the presence of real, traumatized human blood of the rare AB type, the serum halos, the absence of paint or pigment, the botanic evidence from Jerusalem, and the geologically specific limestone dust matching Jerusalem's tombs. Each of these points is a powerful piece of evidence on its own. Furthermore, we have the medically precise details that a forger would be highly unlikely to know, such as the nail wound in the wrist instead of the palm, and the corresponding retraction of the thumb. We have the separate corroborating evidence of the Sudarium of Oviedo, with its matching blood type and stain patterns, and perhaps most inexplicably, we have the three-dimensional information encoded in the image, a feature that no known artistic or natural process can yet explain, and which no medieval artist could have possibly created. When you place all of these puzzle pieces on the table, they do not form a random collection. They interlock to create a single, unified picture. This cumulative case challenges us to look beyond any single objection, such as the controversial 1988 carbon dating test, which many scientists now believe was flawed due to testing a repaired, non-original section of the cloth. An honest investigator must weigh all the evidence. The question is not whether one piece of data can be disputed, but whether the totality of the evidence, prophetic, historical, archaeological, and forensic, points more strongly toward authenticity or forgery. The sheer volume and consistency of the data supporting a first-century Jerusalem-based crucifixion event is, for many, simply too overwhelming to dismiss as a series of unrelated coincidences. The Shroud of Turin presents a profound challenge to the prevailing assumptions of the modern, secular mind. Our contemporary worldview is often built on philosophical naturalism, the belief that the physical, material world is all that exists, and that every event has a purely natural explanation. Miracles are, by this definition, impossible. The Shroud directly confronts this worldview. While science has been able to tell us a great deal about what the Shroud is, a linen cloth with real blood and a chemically altered image, it has been completely unable to explain how the image was formed. The unique combination of features defies all known naturalistic explanations. This creates a moment of intellectual tension. We're faced with an artifact that appears to be scientifically unexplainable, yet its characteristics align perfectly with a historical event that claims to be supernatural at its core, the death and burial of the Son of God. The image itself, with its superficial nature and three-dimensional encoding, seems to be the result of a short, intense burst of energy or radiation emanating from the body itself. This has led some scientists to speculate, however cautiously, that the image-forming event could be consistent with the moment of the resurrection, a burst of divine energy leaving its imprint on the cloth. This possibility forces a difficult choice. Does one dismiss the mountain of evidence that points to the shroud's authenticity in order to preserve a commitment to naturalism? Or does one follow the evidence where it leads, even if it points toward a conclusion that lies outside the comfortable boundaries of our materialistic worldview? The shroud does not allow for a comfortable middle ground. It quietly and persistently asks us to consider that there may be more to reality than what can be measured in a laboratory. It challenges the assumption that science has all the answers and invites us to be open to the possibility of a transcendent reality. This is not an appeal to abandon science. On the contrary, it's science that has unlocked the deepest mysteries of the shroud. It is through rigorous scientific inquiry that the forgery hypothesis has been rendered almost completely untenable. The challenge, therefore, is to be truly scientific, which means being open to all the data, even the data that does not fit our preconceived notions. The Shroud of Turin challenges the modern mind to be humble, to admit the limits of our own understanding, and to consider that the greatest event in human history may have left behind a physical clue that defies our every attempt to explain it away. After examining the prophecies, the history, and the scientific evidence, we are left with an enduring question that hangs in the air. What if it is true? What if this simple linen cloth is, in fact, the authentic burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth? The implications of that possibility are honestly staggering. It would mean that we have a tangible, physical link to the most important moment in history. It would mean that the suffering described in the Gospels and foretold by the prophets was not a sanitized story, but a brutal, physical reality, the evidence of which we can still see with our own eyes today. The shroud transforms the abstract into the concrete. If it is true, the shroud is not merely an archaeological artifact. It's a silent witness to the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan. It becomes a visual testament to the depth of God's love, showing the price that was paid for humanity's sin. The image of the scourged and crucified man becomes a profound object of meditation, a window into the passion of Christ that words alone cannot fully convey. It serves as a powerful confirmation that the Bible is not a book of myths, but a historically reliable record of God's interaction with humanity, a record so accurate that even its most minute details are corroborated by modern science. The Shroud of Turin, however, ultimately points beyond itself. It's a record of a death, but the story it is a part of is a story of life. The cloth is empty. The body that was once wrapped within it is gone. In this way, the shroud's greatest testimony may be its own emptiness. It leads us to the door of the empty tomb and invites us to consider the event that happened next, the resurrection. While the cloth can only testify to the death and burial, it sets the stage for the central claim of Christianity, that Jesus Christ conquered death and rose again, offering eternal life to all who believe in him. This, then, is the final application and invitation. The evidence surrounding the Shroud of Turin is presented not to compel belief through force of logic, but to invite you into a deeper journey of discovery and faith. It provides a solid foundation for you to stand on as you consider the claims of Jesus. We encourage you to continue this investigation for yourself, to study the scriptures, to weigh the evidence, and to ask the big questions. The shroud is a whisper from the past, a clue left behind. The ultimate step of faith is a personal one, an answer to the invitation that echoes from the empty tomb and the empty cloth.